The Western game industry has been going through it for the past, few years, and don't really talk about Nintendo because they aren't really pertinent to the situation when it comes to the infiltration of certain ideologies, very interesting business practices. The Big N kind of generally goes about their own business, conducting their own ways, and frankly, ever since the release of the Switch, it's far and away the most popular console that's out there, and hell, they have an incredibly loyal and incredibly vast install base, so they are just out there doing the best things that they can for the industry. But as long-term gamers, old-school gamers, if you know, that Nintendo, when things seem to be going all well and good, just don't discount their propensity to do something incredibly dim. Now, this issue that popped up very recently and has been resolved very quickly as well presents a much more nuanced, a much more gray case, because I don't know where you line up on the emulation discussion. I'll tell you, I have nothing wrong with it when it comes to, playing old games that aren't available. Like, you want to play something that's modded up, you want to play a hack or something like that, that's totally fine as well. You're getting a completely different and transformative game than the one that was originally presented at sale. But then when you have Nintendo alleging that a popular emulator, Yuzu, is committing piracy at a colossal scale, that's very interesting. It's very interesting because there's a lot of different arguments that you can get into on this one, because yes, the Nintendo Switch, if it isn't already, I think it's just behind the PS2 and the Wii as well as the best-selling console of all time, so they're doing absolutely fine right now. Do they need to go after a emulator because they've been aggrieved in the industry or been deprived of sales they would have otherwise gotten? That's a bigger issue to tackle, because the whole debate around piracy and different forums and venues as well, not just simply from the video game aspect, but when it comes to comic books, when it comes to audiobooks, movies, music, all of that stuff. Are you really, for every person that sails the seven seas as it were, to procure a piece of content, you can't say for sure whether or not that person would have, if the ability to simply make a couple of clicks and button presses wouldn't have, went out and just bought the piece of media that he or she pirated. Yes, there's a lot of damage that can be done by these sites and using these applications. I cannot take that away from anybody. But at the same time, with certain types of knowledge of this situation, when you're simply just trying to peruse somebody's catalog, like if you don't know for sure if you like a TV show, you don't know if you like somebody's music or something, you listen through grayer means, and then, big fan of that, and all of a sudden you just start to acquire their catalog, and you've created a fan through a free means of entry. So it's a much larger discussion, but I think it's one that's worth having potentially at a different date and with a different venue, because taking a look at what Nintendo did, I think they've kind of put the fear of God in a bunch of emulators out there, and just for how quickly and how viciously a verdict was rendered in their favor. So Nintendo lawsuit accuses Switch emulator Yuzu of piracy at a colossal scale as the latest salvo in the seemingly never-ending war against emulation, the producer of the third best-selling video game console of all time and the second best. I think that's the way that it works. PS2, then the Wii, or is it the Wii and then the PS2? Whatever. The name that is synonymous with video games. You probably still have an old aunt or uncle or maybe your grandparents that just say, "You playing the Nintendo?" They are the face of modern gaming. Come on. Modern, past 40 years, has filed a lawsuit against the creators of Yuzu Emulator for the Nintendo Switch. Yes, this is where it gets maybe a little bit more black and white for people, but then I see the arguments on the other side of it as somebody who, very recently also said, I'm thoroughly enjoying Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. It's one of my favorite games that I played in a very long time, but I don't play very many games, so, take that with a grain of salt. But for as much as I love the game, I am looking forward to the PC port for, some of these quality of life improvements that emulation does provide for some of these Switch games. But let's continue. The suit filed in Rhode Island alleges that Yuzu developers Tropic Haze are liable for facilitating piracy at a colossal scale. What exactly is a colossal scale? Is that just flowery language to elicit an emotion from a judge? Potentially. Specifically, Nintendo's suit says that the developers of Yuzu Emulator are responsible for over 1 million individual instances of piracy of Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom that took place in the weeks before the game's release. Oh, so it got leaked out there by somebody, and because it got leaked, Yuzu's directly responsible for the game being, what, like, in the top 10 of best-selling games in previous year? Yeah, interesting case, but okay, cool. How do you even quantify that? Well over 1 million instances of piracy. How do we know that for sure? I'm sure that that's probably not far off, but how do you accurately quantify this? Nintendo holds Tropique is liable for piracy because it offers a conveniently accessible and easy to understand guide on dumping your own games from your Nintendo Switch. Yeah, see, that's where I think the conversation starts to become a little bit more muddied because, well, I have a Switch. I bought it, back in the gap, back when it first came out. I've got a few games that are over there and some of the big heavy hitters from the early point in the life cycle. And because the Nintendo Switch, not exactly the most powerful console that's out there, if you want to up-res it to 4K, if you want it to run in 60 FPS, especially if you're playing such an intensive action-adventure game like Breath of the Wild or Tears of the Kingdom, or if you just simply don't like the goofy little Joy-Cons and you want to use a more traditional controller for some of the platforming in a Mario game, if you bought the license to the game, if you have the physical cartridge or the digital download, well, I guess you couldn't really dump your own ROM if you have the digital download of it, or maybe you can. I'm completely unaware of how this practice fully works. It starts to get into the whole property rights debate, and when it comes to those types of lines of questioning, yeah, there needs to be further clarification where, okay, if you purchase a game, is it yours, or are you just buying a license? Is it kind of like an expensive rental that they can renege on at any point in time? And then you start to delve down the whole conversation about digital media rights and how all of that is going to eventually have to come to head in the near future as we move to a much more digital landscape. But yeah, this lawsuit was filed very, very recently, and it was resolved very, very quickly. Okay, Nintendo wins $2.4 million in Switch emulator lawsuit. Yuzu to shut down. Yuzu, yeah, will shut down operations. All because they offered a service which isn't exclusively a Nintendo Switch emulator. As you can see right here, what you got, Link to the Past that's down there. So yeah, an old Switch game. Okay, you got the Postal, like you can get Postal on Steam for Christ's sakes. But okay, you got all of these different games that are like, I don't think the original Quake was on Switch. I don't think it was around at that point in time, but it must be like a one-stop shop. It's just, there's many other emulators that do the exact same thing. It's just this one right there ended up catching all the heat. Makers of Nintendo Switch emulator Yuzu owe Nintendo $2.4 million after reaching a settlement with the Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom developer following a lawsuit over the open source emulator just last week. Both Nintendo and Tropique, the company behind Yuzu, filed for a final judgment and permanent injunctions on Monday, according to the court documents, after Nintendo accused Yuzu makers of copyright infringement, circumvention of Nintendo Switch protections, and selling those circumvention technologies as Yuzu, among other things. That's interesting. So I haven't heard about this emulator, this specific one that's out there. I know that there's another one where, you can play maybe a little bit more up-to-date games or something like that, but normally this type of software is completely and totally free to use. But okay, settlement is pending. Yes, a judge's approval. Yuzu is a free Nintendo Switch emulator that was released in 2018, months after the Nintendo launched the Switch. So how strong were your protections if they had it beat within a couple of months? It's interesting. Normally, I'm pretty sure there isn't a working PS5 emulator. It took forever for anybody to really work on getting a PS4, and even PS3 is still a little sketchy at this point in time. The fact that they had something up and running within months of the Switch going live is kind of crazy. It's a piece of software that lets people play Nintendo Switch games on their computers or phones. Yo, man, just goes to show you how underpowered the Switch is, including Tears of the Kingdom, which Nintendo cited in the lawsuit. Yes, specifically, Nintendo said that more than 1 million people played the game before the release date because of leaked copies. How do you know that? No, no! Beyond the money, the terms of the settlement dictate Tropiques will have to stop operations on Yuzu entirely. Statement published on Discord, which we actually have right here, that they reposted to Twitter. And as you can see, the engagement, the fact that this has 4.9, just about 5 million views on it, just kind of lets you know where we're at. So, hello, users and Citra fans. Forgive me if I'm unsure exactly what Citra is. We write today to inform you that Yuzu and Yuzu's support of Citra are being discontinued. That must be the software behind the company. Okay, this makes more sense. Effective immediately. Yuzu and its team have always been against piracy. We started the projects in good faith, out of passion for Nintendo and its consoles and games. We are not intending to cause harm, but we see now that because our project can circumvent Nintendo's technological protection measures and allow users to play games outside of authorized hardware, they have led to extensive piracy. In particular, we have been deeply disappointed when users have used our software to leak game content prior to its release and ruin the experience for legitimate purchasers and fans. We have come to the decision that we cannot continue to allow this to occur. We've come to the decision. Right. Piracy was never our intention, and we believe that piracy of video games and on video game consoles should end. Effective today, we will be pulling our code repositories offline, discontinuing our Patreon accounts and Discord servers, and soon shutting down our websites. We hope our actions will be a small step towards ending piracy of all creator works. And Nintendo, please, we don't have $2.4 million. Can you take this apology as, payment towards the outstanding balance? Thank you for years of support and for understanding our decisions. But perusing some of the quote tweets, there's a lot of good cases being made here. Okay, Nintendo explaining how 3DS emulation harms them when they haven't manufactured or sold the console for years, and they won't let you buy the games anymore. Yeah, that's a big problem, man, okay? And it's interesting, right? Because they cherry-picked the one example of Tears of the Kingdom apparently getting leaked, and apparently a lot of people played it. Can't dispute that because I don't know enough about the situation, but clearly it was compelling enough within the confines of the courtroom. But the 3DS, the Game Boy, I understand that there are a couple of games that have received a re-release, but in totality, I think the 3DS hasn't quite made the leap. The Wii U, I don't know if there's any exclusive left on that console, but I'd imagine that one ended up getting sunsetted as quickly as the Switch took off. A cataclysmic failure. But yeah, somebody specifically points out, Nintendo, after you use an emulator, play Kid Icarus Uprising. I actually have a copy of that. A game that you can't even buy from them anymore. Exactly. Back to playing Nintendo at Switch at 27 FPS, 800p, with the shittiest controls known to man. Yeah, and see, that's the problem. If you buy the game and you want to go ahead and make the modifications to it as you wish, that's like my personal opinion. There's nothing wrong with that at all. I love running back old games with new mods, quality of life improvements. It makes it an entirely unique and distinctive experience, one of which, either due to the times and the limitations of the hardware when it was initially released, or something that was simply an oversight back in the day when you couldn't just simply patch or charge people to fix your broken game. Bethesda looking at you. Then we start to, when we take the other side of this conversation, then you start to worry and have to take into account IP law and the fact that, yeah, okay, somebody wants to play Kid Icarus Uprising on an emulator. Well, that's still Nintendo's IP. You might have bought it. They intended it for release on their own proprietary console. It gets muddy. From a legalistic perspective, they rule that it's some sort of theft. I have to change the laws, would have to set a good lawsuit in order to reverse a ruling such as that. But when it comes to a more common sense approach to this stuff, that's where it starts to get a little bit gray, a little bit more muddy. Like me personally, if a game's not available for wide release, it's not easily accessible for consumers, if it's something that is ancient, that they are purposefully gatekeeping away from the public from experiencing, there I'd start to listen to the cases a little bit more strongly because, well, if the company is not providing a service and there's somebody else that's out there on the open market willing to do that, I don't know about the whole selling thing, but if you're going to be making freeware in order for you to play it, that's a different conversation. So the whole piracy argument kind of falls on its face when it's not even something that you could buy. It's not something that they are directly making a profit off of because of all of those old games from all of the out of circulation systems are getting emulated. How can it be piracy? How can it be lost sales if you aren't even selling the product to begin with, and you're not offering the same experience somebody else can by using an emulator on highly more sophisticated hardware. It's a very nuanced conversation. I'm not saying that I have all the answers on it. It's just one that I've thought about quite a bit throughout the years as we've started to delve into a much more digital space. So yeah, I found this very fascinating. Hopefully you guys too is a good conversation topic, or at least something to mull over a little bit. So with all that said, thank you all very much for the gift of your time. I've been Don Consuelo. I want you to follow your gut and get after it. Take care, everyone.